The classroom buzzed with the usual chatter as students filed out, but my heart raced for an entirely different reason. I stole a glance at Jake, my professor, his dark hair slightly tousled, and those impossibly deep eyes fixed on me. There was a tension in the air, palpable and electric, as if the world outside had faded away. Time seemed to stand still. "Are you coming?" he asked, breaking the silence, his voice low and smooth, sending shivers down my spine. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my husband, David, waiting for me at home. The image of his warm smile and comforting presence collided with the undeniable heat radiating from Jake. I felt torn, caught in a web of longing and guilt. I need to go," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper, but my body felt anchored in place, unwilling to move away from him. Jake stepped closer, his gaze piercing through my uncertainty. "You don't have to. We could talk, just for a moment longer." My mind raced with the implications. What was I about to do? The question echoed in my mind like a haunting melody. I could feel my heart pounding, each beat reminding me of the promise I had made to David. But here I was, staring into the soul of a man who made me feel alive, in a way I hadn't felt in years. The moment hung between us, thick with possibilities. I looked into Jake's eyes, searching for answers, yet all I found was a reflection of my own desire. I remember the day Jake became my tutor so vividly. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Chicago, and the classroom buzzed with the chatter of students packing their bags and discussing their plans for the evening. I was lost in my thoughts, my mind swirling with the usual worries of balancing work and home life. The moment I glanced up and met Jake's eyes, everything changed. The air seemed to thicken between us, and I felt a rush of heat that had nothing to do with the classroom temperature. "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" Jake asked, his voice low and inviting. He leaned against the desk, his gaze steady. I nodded, my heart racing as the last of the students filed out. "What's up?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, though my pulse quickened at his proximity. "I was thinking, maybe I could help you with that project after class?" he suggested, a hint of mischief in his smile. I hesitated. The idea of spending more time with him, alone, sent a thrill through me. "At your place?" The words slipped out before I could think better of them. "Yeah, I mean, if you want," he replied, a spark of surprise lighting up his eyes. "I promise I won't bite." His playful tone made me chuckle, but I could feel a weight in my stomach. David was at home, waiting for me, his trust in me unwavering. But the thought of being alone with Jake? It was intoxicating. "All right, sounds good," I said, surprising even myself. When I arrived at Jake's apartment later that evening, I felt a strange mix of excitement and nerves. The door opened to reveal a space that was both inviting and chaotic, filled with books and papers scattered everywhere. "Welcome to my humble abode," Jake said, stepping aside to let me in. "Is it always this messy?" I teased, looking around with a smile. "Only when I'm grading papers," he replied, a grin matching mine. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll grab us some coffee." I sat on the couch, trying to act relaxed while my heart raced. The atmosphere was casual, but the tension was palpable. He returned, 2 steaming mugs in hand, and sat down close enough that our knees brushed. "Thanks," I said, taking a sip. The rich aroma filled my senses, grounding me for a moment. "So, where do we start?" "Let's just chat for a bit. We can figure out the project later," he suggested, his voice smooth. The conversation flowed effortlessly as we discussed everything from our favorite books to the quirks of our students. I found myself leaning in, captivated by the way he spoke, the way his eyes sparkled with passion. It felt so natural, yet so wrong. Then, without warning, he reached out and touched my arm, his fingers lingering. A jolt of electricity shot through me, igniting something I had tried to ignore. "You know, I've been going through a rough patch with my girlfriend," he confessed, looking down for a moment. "It hasn't been easy." I felt a pang of sympathy mixed with something darker. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied softly. "Relationships can be really tough." He met my gaze, and I could see the raw vulnerability in his eyes. It feels like I'm living in two worlds. I want more, but I'm stuck." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I understood that feeling all too well. David and I had been together for years, but lately, everything felt routine, predictable. I wanted to feel alive again. "What about you? How's everything with David?" Jake asked, his voice low and probing. I hesitated, debating whether to share my own struggles. "It's complicated," I finally admitted. "Life gets in the way sometimes. It's like we're just going through the motions." "Maybe we both need a change," he suggested, his gaze steady on mine. I could feel the intensity of the moment, the unspoken connection between us sparking like a live wire. Before I knew it, our conversation shifted, and the air grew thick with anticipation. I leaned in closer, my heart pounding in my chest, and he mirrored my movement. The first touch felt like a spark igniting a flame, and I could barely breathe. "Is this okay?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper, searching my eyes for permission. I nodded, unable to form words. The reality of what I was doing felt distant, overshadowed by the overwhelming pull between us. He brushed his fingers against my arm again, and I shivered at the contact. It was electric, making my skin tingle. In that moment, the world outside faded away. I was no longer a wife, bound by promises. I was just a woman caught up in something exhilarating and terrifying. I could feel the weight of my choices pressing down on me, but all I could think about was the warmth radiating from Jake, the way he made me feel so alive. "Let's just enjoy this moment," he said, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. And in that instant, I knew I was crossing a line I had never intended to approach. But the thrill of the unknown was too enticing to resist. I remember the evening of our first dinner outside the classroom as if it were etched in my mind. Jake suggested we go to a small Italian restaurant he loved, one that was tucked away from the busy streets of Chicago. I felt a mix of excitement and dread, knowing that I was stepping further away from the life I had built with David. As I walked into the restaurant, my heart raced. It was dimly lit, with soft music playing in the background, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt almost forbidden. We settled into a corner booth, and I couldn't help but notice how his eyes sparkled under the low lights. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his voice smooth like honey. I felt a blush creeping up my cheeks. "Thank you," I replied, trying to sound casual, but the warmth of his gaze made it hard to keep my composure. As we shared a bottle of wine, the conversation flowed easily, like a river that knew no bounds. We talked about everything, our favorite books, movies, and even our dreams. Each laugh we shared felt electric, drawing us closer together. I could see the way he leaned in, hanging on my every word, and I couldn't help but feel the magnetic pull between us. "What's your husband like?" Jake asked, his tone casual yet probing. I hesitated, the mention of David hanging heavily in the air. "He's good. We have our routines," I said, my voice trailing off. I didn't want to dwell on David, not when Jake was sitting across from me, looking so intensely handsome. But sometimes, I feel like there's something missing. Jake nodded, his expression understanding. "I get that. Sometimes life just feels stagnant, you know?" There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a shared understanding of longing that sent a thrill down my spine. I couldn't help but wonder if he felt as trapped as I did. The evening wore on, and laughter filled the space between us. Our hands brushed against each other on the table, and I felt a spark that made my heart race. It was a simple touch, yet it sent shivers through me, igniting a desire I had tried to ignore. When I looked into his eyes, I saw want mirrored back at me. "Should we get dessert?" he asked, a playful smile on his lips. "I promise it's worth it." I nodded, a little breathless. As the waiter placed a slice of rich chocolate cake between us, Jake leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know, I've been looking forward to this all week." "Me too," I admitted, my heart pounding. I could feel the tension thickening the air, each moment stretching longer than the last. As I savored the cake, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing some invisible line. After dinner, Jake suggested a walk along the river. The night was cool, but I felt warm, alive. "I love walking here at night," he said, his hands tucked into his pockets. "It's peaceful, and it gives you time to think." We strolled side by side, the city lights twinkling above us like stars. I could feel the weight of my decisions pressing down on me. The further we walked, the more I felt the pull of his presence. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. "Are you okay?" he asked, glancing at me with concern. "You seem a bit lost in thought." "I am," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, everything feels so complicated." "Complicated can be good sometimes," he replied, his gaze steady on mine. "It can lead to unexpected places." With each step, the distance between us seemed to disappear. Our shoulders brushed, and I felt an undeniable urge to close the gap. When we reached a quiet spot by the water, I turned to face him, my heart racing. There was something in his eyes, something that told me he felt it too. Without thinking, I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining. The moment was electric, and I felt a rush of heat spread through me. "Jake," I said, my voice trembling. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice low and husky. "But I can't stop thinking about you." In that instant, everything else faded away. The city, my life with David, the promises I had made, they all vanished. It was just Jake and me, standing there under the stars, caught in a moment that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Maybe we shouldn't," I said, my heart screaming against my better judgment. "Maybe," he replied, stepping closer, his breath warm against my face. "But I want to." That was all it took. The world around us blurred, and I leaned in, our lips meeting in a hesitant kiss that quickly ignited into something fierce and passionate. The taste of him was intoxicating, and I lost myself in the moment, forgetting everything I had left behind. As we pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The thrill of the kiss coursed through me, but so did the weight of my betrayal. I felt exhilarated and terrified at once, knowing that I had taken a leap into the unknown, a leap that would change everything. The night was colder than I expected, but the chill was quickly forgotten the moment Jake leaned closer to me. We stood beneath the shimmering lights of the city, the glow casting a warm halo around us. My heart raced, a mixture of excitement and dread swirling inside me. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, but all I could focus on was him, standing there with those penetrating blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Are you cold?" he asked, his voice low and smooth, sending shivers down my spine. I shook my head, though the truth was that I was anything but cold. "No, I'm fine," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt the heat radiating from him, drawing me in closer, as if the world around us had fallen away. The tension between us was electric, a current that sparked with every shared glance. I could hardly remember why I was standing here, outside, with him. My husband David was at home, probably watching TV or waiting for me to return so we could have dinner together. The thought of him made my stomach churn with guilt, but it was quickly drowned out by the intoxicating pull I felt towards Jake. Just as I was about to speak, to pull away and remind myself of the promises I had made, he moved closer, bridging the gap between us. "I've been thinking about you," he said, his breath warm against my cheek. "A lot." My heart raced at his words, a thrill coursing through me. I had been thinking about him too, more than I cared to admit. "Jake, we shouldn't," I began, but my voice trailed off as he reached out, his hand gently touching my arm. The moment our skin connected, a rush of warmth spread through me. He looked down at my arm, then back into my eyes, and I could see the conflict mirrored in his gaze. "I know," he said softly, "but it feels so right, doesn't it?" It did. It felt incredibly right, and that terrified me. I wanted to step back, to remind myself that this was wrong. But just then, he leaned in closer, his lips brushing against mine. The kiss was tentative at first, a gentle exploration, but it quickly ignited into something far more intense. I felt myself melting against him, all thoughts of David fading away as I succumbed to the moment. His lips moved against mine, sending waves of desire crashing through me. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, lost in the sensation of his warmth. The guilt that had loomed over me moments before vanished, replaced by a burning need that consumed me. I knew I was betraying David, but in that instant, I didn't care. I didn't want to think about the consequences. All I wanted was to feel more. "God, I've wanted to do this since the first day I met you," Jake murmured against my lips, his hands framing my face, his eyes dark with desire. "What are we doing?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. The thrill of the kiss clashed with the reality of my life, but the thrill was winning. Jake smiled, that wicked smile that made my knees weak. Something we both want, something we can't ignore anymore. His words sent another wave of heat through me, igniting every part of my being. I pulled back slightly, needing a moment to breathe, to think. "But David," I started, the name feeling heavy on my tongue. "David isn't here," Jake interrupted gently, his eyes searching mine. "And right now, it's just you and me. Just this moment." He was right. David was miles away, and here I was, standing in the glow of the city lights, entranced by a man who made my heart race in a way I hadn't felt in years. I could feel the excitement coursing through my veins, drowning out the voice of reason that warned me to stop. "Just this moment," I echoed, feeling the weight of his gaze. I knew I was teetering on the edge of something dangerous, but in that moment, it felt like freedom. Jake stepped closer again, and the world around us faded into the background. I could see the hunger in his eyes, mirroring my own desires. "Just let go," he urged, his voice a low whisper. "Just for tonight." And so I did. I let go of the guilt, the shame, and the promises I had made to myself. I kissed him back with fervor, tasting the sweetness of our stolen moment, the thrill of the unknown. The city lights twinkled above us, but all I could see was him. For that night, I chose to forget everything else. I chose to embrace the chaos of my heart, the thrill of betrayal, and the intoxicating desire that wrapped around us like a cocoon. I knew I was crossing a line, but in that moment, I didn't care. I was alive, and it felt far too good to stop. I stood outside Jake's house, my heart racing as I tried to steady my breath. The evening air was thick with anticipation, and I could almost hear the echoes of my own thoughts, battling against the weight of my reality. I felt like a moth drawn to a flame, knowing full well the risks, but unable to resist the allure. The promise I had made to David, my husband, loomed over me like a dark cloud. But here I was, about to break that promise. As I stepped inside, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee welcomed me, wrapping around me like a warm blanket. "Hey, you made it," Jake said, his voice smooth and inviting. He stood by the kitchen counter, casually leaning against it, a playful smile on his lips. That smile sent a shiver down my spine, igniting something deep within me that I had tried so hard to suppress. "Yeah, I wasn't sure I would," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt the familiar rush of nerves mingling with excitement. I could hardly believe I was here, in his space, about to cross a line I had promised myself never to cross. "Come on, don't look so tense. It's just coffee," he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. He poured a cup and handed it to me, our fingers brushing briefly. A jolt of electricity surged through me, and I quickly looked away, trying to regain my composure. I took a sip, the warmth of the coffee contrasting sharply with the chill of my internal conflict. "Thanks," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "This is nice." "Just wait until you try my famous cookies," he teased, moving closer. The space between us felt charged, and I was acutely aware of every detail. The way his shirt clung to his muscles, the way his eyes seemed to draw me in, making it impossible to look away. "Famous, huh? I'll be the judge of that," I replied, trying to sound playful, but my heart was pounding in my chest. He chuckled softly, and for a moment, the tension eased. We talked about mundane things, trivial topics that kept the conversation light, but I could feel the air shifting. With every laugh, every shared glance, the gravity of our situation grew heavier. "Have you thought about what we talked about in class?" Jake asked, suddenly serious. His expression turned earnest, and I felt my stomach flip. "Yeah, I have," I replied, my heart racing. "But—" "No buts," he interrupted gently, stepping even closer. "You're not happy, are you?" My breath caught in my throat. "I don't want to talk about David." The words came out sharper than I intended, but the thought of my husband made the guilt swell inside me. "Okay, we don't have to," he said softly, his gaze unwavering. "But I want you to know that you deserve to feel alive. You deserve to be happy." His words wrapped around me, pulling me closer to the edge. I knew I should leave, that this was dangerous ground, but the way he looked at me made it hard to think straight. Before I knew it, I was stepping closer, drawn in by the intensity of his eyes. "Jake, But I never finished the sentence. In a swift motion, he closed the distance between us, capturing my lips with his. The kiss was electric, igniting a fire within me that I had long thought extinguished. I melted against him, all thoughts of David fading away as I lost myself in the moment. When we finally pulled away, I gasped for air, my mind racing. "What are we doing?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I don't know," he admitted, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "But it feels right, doesn't it? Just for tonight?" I wanted to say no, to pull back and remind myself of the consequences. But there was a part of me that craved this connection, this passion. "Just tonight," I whispered, almost to myself. "Good," he said, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Let's just enjoy this moment." The night unfolded like a dream, filled with laughter and deep conversations that seemed to erase the weight of my life outside these walls. We talked about everything and nothing, and with each passing minute, I felt myself letting go of the guilt, allowing the thrill of secrecy to envelop me. Jake reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers, and I felt a rush of warmth. "You're so beautiful," he said, his voice low and sincere. I can't believe I get to be here with you. I felt my cheeks flush as I looked away, overwhelmed by the intimacy of the moment. It's just coffee. I tried to deflect, but he tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. It's so much more than that, he insisted. His thumb traced my jawline, sending shivers down my spine. The heat between us was undeniable, like a magnet pulling us closer. As the evening wore on, the conversations faded, replaced by the undeniable need that simmered between us. The kiss we shared earlier ignited a fire that I had never anticipated. Come here, he murmured, pulling me closer. The world outside faded away, leaving just the two of us in this moment. I knew I was breaking a promise, but the thrill of being here, of being wanted, was intoxicating. The night felt endless, filled with stolen glances and whispered confessions, and as I surrendered to the passion that enveloped us, I knew that this was a turning point. In Jake's arms, I felt alive, like I was stepping into a new existence, one where I could embrace my desires without fear. And for the first time in a long while, I forgot about the promises I had made, at least for now. I'm sitting at my desk, the classroom buzzing with the chatter of students packing their bags, but my mind is elsewhere. I can't help but steal glances at Jake. He stands at the front of the room, his dark hair slightly tousled, a hint of a smile playing on his lips as he talks to a student. The way he moves, the way he speaks, sends a thrill through me that I can't ignore. My heart races, and I feel a heat rising in my cheeks. Hey, are you coming to the study session later? One of my classmates nudges me, breaking my focus. Yeah, I'll be there, I reply absently, still watching Jake. The moment feels electric, as if the air around us is thick with unspoken words. As the last student leaves, I know I should be heading home to David, my husband, who is waiting for me. The thought of him pulls at me, but I can't shake the feeling of Jake's presence. It's like a magnet drawing me in, and I'm powerless to resist. I catch Jake's eye, and for a moment, time seems to stop. You okay? He asks, concern flickering across his face. Yeah, just lost in thought, I manage to say, the truth hanging heavily in the air between us. Thought I'd lost you there for a second, he replies, stepping closer. The warmth radiating from him is almost overwhelming. I can't help but smile, feeling the pull between us grow stronger. I was just thinking about the material for the study session. Right, the material, he says, his voice dropping an octave. There's an unspoken understanding in his gaze, a shared moment that feels intimate, charged with possibilities. After a beat, he adds, I'm glad you're coming. I could use the company. I feel a flutter in my stomach. Me too, I whisper, my heart racing at the thought of spending more time with him. Days pass, and our little encounters become my secret escape. We exchange furtive messages during class, each one sending a rush of excitement through me. Can't wait to see you later, he texts one afternoon. My heart skips a beat. I glance at David, who is oblivious to my distraction. He talks about his day, and I nod along, but my mind drifts to Jake. The thrill of our clandestine connection is intoxicating. Are you even listening? David's voice pulls me back. Of course, I reply quickly, forcing a smile. I feel guilty, but that guilt only fuels the fire inside me. Every time I see Jake, the tension between us heightens. It's not just the stolen glances or the lingering touches. It's the way he makes me feel alive, something I haven't felt in a long time. During one of our study sessions, I can barely concentrate. The way he leans over me, explaining a concept, sends shivers down my spine. You're doing great, he says, his breath warm against my ear. Thanks, I reply, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't help but imagine what it would be like to be with him, to explore this chemistry that ignites whenever we're together. The line between right and wrong blurs with each passing day. I find myself daydreaming about Jake during lessons, my mind racing with fantasies that become bolder, more daring. I notice the way he watches me, the intensity of his gaze making my heart race. One day, after a particularly charged study session, he leans closer, his voice low. I know this is complicated, but I can't stop thinking about you. My breath hitches at his confession. Jake, we shouldn't. I know, but it's hard to ignore what's between us. In that moment, I realize I'm losing myself in this whirlwind of emotions. I'm caught between my life with David and the exhilarating thrill Jake brings. The guilt fades, and all I can feel is the pull toward him, the excitement of what could be. As I leave the classroom that day, my heart races with the thrill of our unspoken connection. I know I'm walking a dangerous line, but the thought of pulling away feels impossible. With each secret text, each stolen glance, I'm drawn deeper into this world I never intended to enter. I'm losing sight of what's right and wrong, but the exhilaration of our secret is too intoxicating to let go. And with every heartbeat, I know that the risk is becoming my new normal, and I'm not sure I want to stop. The invitation arrived just when I thought I had a handle on everything. How about we take a weekend trip together? Jake suggested one afternoon, his voice low and enticing, like a secret whispered just for me. My heart raced at the thought of escaping the confines of my ordinary life with David, the man who had always been my rock, my safe harbor. I hesitated, glancing at the clock. David would be out of town for work, which made the timing perfect. But then, there was the rush of guilt that followed. I had spent years building a life with him, and here I was, contemplating a weekend away with another man. Are you sure? I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice shook slightly. Jake leaned closer, his gaze piercing through my feigned indifference. We could just get away for a bit. No one has to know. The promise in his words sent shivers down my spine. I could almost taste the freedom that came with the idea of abandoning my responsibilities, if only for a short while. My mind raced as I thought about how to explain my absence to David. I could tell him it's a work retreat, I finally said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Just a weekend thing. Perfect, Jake replied, a grin spreading across his face. I'll handle the details. Just be ready. As the days passed, the anticipation built within me, and alongside it, an undercurrent of fear. What if David found out? What if this was the moment everything fell apart? But the thrill of planning the escape overshadowed my worries. I was being reckless, but in a way, it felt liberating. The day finally arrived. I packed my bag with a fluttering heart and a racing mind, each item a reminder of my double life. I chose clothes that made me feel beautiful, something I hadn't done in ages. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked alive, vibrant, and yet so deeply conflicted. When I climbed into my car, I could hardly breathe. The thrill of the unknown awaited me, and as I drove towards the hotel, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. What if I was making a terrible mistake? But the thought of Jake waiting for me made me push those doubts aside. I craved him, his presence, his touch. Arriving at the hotel, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The air was thick with anticipation. Every step towards the lobby heavy with the weight of my choices. I spotted Jake leaning against the reception desk, looking effortlessly handsome. My heart raced even faster, and I could feel my breath hitch in my throat. "Hey there," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Ready for our adventure?" I nodded, my pulse quickening. "I think so. This feels surreal." He took my hand, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. "Trust me, it will be worth it," he said, leading me to our room. The moment the door closed behind us, the tension shifted. The room was dimly lit, and the air felt charged. I could almost taste the thrill of what was to come. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "Believe it. Just let go." His words sent a wave of heat flooding through me. We were standing on the edge, and I could feel the pull of the abyss beneath. I wanted to dive in, but a part of me was terrified of what lay below. "Okay," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's just enjoy the moment." With that, he leaned in, capturing my lips with his. The kiss was electric, igniting every nerve ending in my body. I melted into him, losing myself in the warmth and intensity of the moment. I could feel everything else fade away. The guilt, the fear, the reality of my life with David. As our kisses deepened, the world outside disappeared. I was no longer a wife or a teacher. I was simply a woman consumed by desire. The softness of Jake's hands on my waist sent shivers down my spine. "You're so beautiful," he murmured against my lips. I felt a blush creep across my cheeks, a mixture of pleasure and shame. "This feels so wrong," I admitted, pulling back slightly, searching his eyes for a hint of hesitation. "Does it?" he asked, his brow arching slightly. "Or does it feel right?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. The truth was, it felt both wrong and right. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, and I had no idea where it would lead. But the thought of turning back felt impossible. "I want this," I finally confessed, the words tumbling out before I could think twice. "I want you." Jake's smile was both triumphant and tender. "Then let's make the most of this weekend." As we settled onto the bed, the reality of my situation became clearer. I was crossing a line I could never uncross. The thrill of the forbidden was intoxicating, pulling me deeper into a world where David didn't exist, where I could be anyone I wanted to be. In that moment, all I could think about was Jake. The way he made me feel, the way he looked at me, as if I were the only woman in the world. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the passion that enveloped us, knowing that once I took this leap, there would be no turning back. I was stepping into a new reality, one filled with both exhilaration and dread, and I found myself longing for what was to come, even as the shadows of my decisions loomed large in the background. I arrived at the hotel, my heart racing in my chest. The air was thick with tension, a delicious mix of excitement and dread. I stepped into the lobby, the plush carpets muffling my footsteps, as I spotted Jake waiting near the reception desk. He looked up, his eyes locking onto mine with a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, a teasing smile playing on his lips. I swallowed hard, my stomach fluttering with nerves. "I'm not sure I am," I admitted, glancing around as if the walls might hear me. Jake took a step closer, his presence a comforting weight. "We can back out if you want," he said softly, but I could see the fire in his gaze. He wanted this as much as I did. "No," I whispered, surprising myself with my conviction. "I need this." The moment we entered our room, the atmosphere shifted. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing us in a world that felt entirely separate from reality. I felt the weight of my decision, the gravity of the betrayal that awaited me. But there was also a thrill that coursed through me, a spark that ignited every nerve ending. Jake moved closer, his hand brushing against my arm. The gentle touch sent waves of pleasure through me, and I instinctively leaned into him. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his voice low and husky. I didn't know how to respond. The compliment wrapped around me like a warm blanket, comforting yet terrifying. I wasn't used to this attention, not like this. But there was no denying the chemistry, the pull that drew us together like magnets. As I stood there, caught in his gaze. I felt the walls closing in. But it didn't matter. I wanted him. I wanted this. And as if he sensed my resolve, Jake closed the distance between us. Our lips met, tentative at first, as if testing the waters. But then, the kiss deepened, igniting a fire that had been smoldering since the moment we met. I melted against him, feeling his hands thread through my hair as he pulled me closer. I lost myself in the moment, forgetting everything else. My husband, my life, the promises I had made. I pulled back, breathless, my mind racing. "What are we doing?" I gasped, the weight of my choices crashing down on me. Jake cupped my face in his hands, his thumb tracing my cheek. "We're doing what we both want," he said, his voice steady. "You deserve to feel this, to be wanted." His words resonated deep within me. I had spent so long feeling invisible, lost in the routine of my marriage. David had been a good husband, but somewhere along the way, the spark had faded. With Jake, everything felt alive again. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Okay," I replied, a mix of fear and exhilaration swirling inside me. We moved to the bed, the sheets cool against my skin as we sank into each other. Every touch felt electric, sending jolts of pleasure through me. I lost track of time as we explored each other, every kiss and caress drowning out the voice of reason in my head. "God, you feel amazing," Jake breathed, his hands roaming over my body with a confidence that made me feel powerful. I arched into him, craving more of his touch. "I've never felt like this before," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Neither have I," he confessed, his eyes dark with desire. "This is more than I ever expected." The night unfolded like a dream, filled with laughter, whispers, and stolen moments that felt both exhilarating and forbidden. The world outside faded away, leaving only us and the heat that consumed us. Each kiss ignited a deeper need, a craving that seemed insatiable. I knew I was crossing a line, but the thrill of the betrayal was intoxicating. I wanted to lose myself in this new reality, to forget the consequences, even if just for a little while. "Is this really happening?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief as I lay in his arms, feeling safe yet exhilarated. "It's happening," Jake replied, his fingers tracing patterns on my skin. "And I don't want it to end." In that moment, I realized I was in too deep. The betrayal had become my new addiction, a rush I was unwilling to give up. I looked into his eyes, feeling a sense of inevitability wash over me. The thrill of what we were doing was intoxicating, and I couldn't help but lean in for another kiss, sealing our fate with every touch. I knew that when the weekend ended, I would have to return to my life with David, to the mundane routine I had once cherished. But for now, in this moment, I was alive, and I was willing to embrace the chaos that lay ahead. I walked through the door, the familiar scent of home wrapping around me like a warm blanket. David was in the living room, flipping through the pages of a magazine, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He looked up, a smile spreading across his face as he saw me. "Hey, how was class?" he asked, his voice inviting and warm. I froze for a moment, a wave of guilt washing over me. How could I answer him? How could I tell him that while he was waiting for me, I was lost in another world? "It was good. Just the usual," I replied, forcing a smile that felt heavy on my lips. David nodded, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. He stood up and walked over, wrapping his arms around me. I hugged him back tightly, wishing I could feel the same warmth I used to feel. Instead, I felt Jake's lingering presence, the way his eyes had burned into mine, igniting something I had tried so hard to ignore. "You're home early. Want to watch a movie later?" David suggested, his voice full of hope. "Sure, sounds good," I managed to say, though my mind was elsewhere. I could almost hear my phone buzzing in my bag, messages from Jake reminding me of what I had chosen to embrace. Each ping was a reminder of my new life, a life I was desperately trying to keep hidden from David. As I made my way to the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread settling in my stomach. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands trembling slightly. What was I doing? I had a life, a husband who loved me. But then I thought of Jake, the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel alive. Are you okay? David's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He was standing in the doorway, concern etched across his face. You seem a bit distant. I waved my hand dismissively. I'm fine, just tired from class. I took a sip of water, the cool liquid doing little to soothe the heat rising within me. David smiled softly, but I could see the hint of worry in his eyes. You should take it easy. I can handle dinner if you want to relax. I wanted to tell him that I didn't deserve his kindness, that I had betrayed him in ways he could never imagine. But instead, I nodded. That would be great. Thanks, love. I turned back to the sink, feeling the tears prick at my eyes. As he moved away, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, my heart racing. It was Jake. Can't stop thinking about you, the message read. I felt a rush of excitement and guilt collide within me. I quickly typed a response, my fingers flying over the screen. Me too. Just got home. David called from the living room, breaking my focus. Dinner will be ready soon. I tucked my phone away, forcing myself to breathe. The sensation of living a double life was overwhelming. I was torn between the warmth of my marriage and the fire that Jake ignited within me. Dinner was a blur. David chatted about his day, his enthusiasm filling the room. I nodded and smiled, but my mind was elsewhere. Each time my phone buzzed, I felt a jolt of anxiety mixed with exhilaration. I excused myself to take a quick call, my heart racing as I heard Jake's voice on the other end. I can't stop thinking about you, he said, his words like honey, sweet and intoxicating. Me neither, I admitted, glancing over my shoulder to make sure David wasn't listening. I just got home. It was so hard to focus all day. Just a few more days until I get to see you again, he said, his tone laced with promise. I bit my lip, the thrill of it all sending shivers down my spine. I know, I can't wait. I hung up, my heart pounding. The weight of my secret pressed down on me, but the thought of seeing Jake again filled me with a reckless joy I hadn't felt in a long time. After dinner, David suggested we watch a movie. I agreed, but each passing minute felt like a countdown to my next escape. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Jake. You're the best part of my day. I felt a rush of warmth, but guilt clawed at my insides. As the movie played, I found myself distracted. I could hear David laughing at the scenes, but the laughter felt distant, muffled by the reality of my choices. I wanted to be present, to be the wife he deserved, but my heart was already with someone else. Are you sure you're okay? David asked again, this time his brow furrowed with concern. You seem off tonight. I'm fine, I said, my voice too high, too strained. Just a little tired. He nodded, but I could see the doubt flicker in his eyes. I felt a rush of panic. How long could I keep this up? How long until he noticed the cracks in our perfect life? When the movie ended, David turned to me, his eyes searching mine. I love you, he said softly, and for a moment, my heart broke. I felt the weight of those words, the sincerity behind them, and I wanted to scream at the injustice of it all. I love you too, I replied, though I could barely believe it myself. As I lay in bed that night, the darkness enveloping me, I felt the distance between us grow. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. I had a choice to make, and yet, The thrill of my new reality pulled me in, wrapping around me like a seductive blanket. I closed my eyes, trying to quiet my racing heart. But all I could think about was Jake and the life I was desperately trying to keep secret. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that the battle between my heart and my mind was only just beginning. The moment I stepped into the classroom, I felt a rush of anticipation. Jake was already there, leaning against his desk, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me. My heart raced as I walked closer, the sound of the door closing behind me echoing in the silence. It was as if the world outside faded away, leaving only us in this small, enclosed space. "Hey," he said, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I could see the warmth in his gaze, the way it held a promise of something more. "Hi," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable, wrapping around us like a blanket. We were alone, and everything felt charged with unspoken words. "Are you ready for our little study session?" he asked, his voice low, almost teasing. I nodded, but the truth was, I was far from ready. The thought of my husband David waiting at home twisted in my stomach, but the heat radiating from Jake made it hard to think straight. As he moved closer, I could smell the faint hint of his cologne, warm and inviting. It drew me in, and I found myself leaning towards him, craving the closeness. "I've been thinking about what we talked about," he said, his eyes searching mine. "About our connection." My breath caught in my throat. "Jake, Shh," he interrupted softly, placing a finger to his lips. "Just let it be for a moment." His hand brushed against my arm, sending a jolt of electricity coursing through me. I was torn between the thrill of his touch and the nagging voice in my head, reminding me of the life I had outside this classroom. "Jake, what are we doing?" I whispered, my heart pounding. "This isn't right." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But doesn't it feel good? Just for now?" He stepped closer, our bodies inches apart. I could feel his warmth, the heat radiating off him, and the air between us crackled with tension. "I can't keep doing this," I said, but even as I spoke the words, I felt myself longing for him. The way he looked at me, like I was the only person in the world, made it hard to resist. He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek. "You're not the only one caught in this," he said, his eyes darkening with emotion. "I've been struggling too. But when I'm with you, everything else fades away." I took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of his words. In that moment, I knew we were both lost in this. "What if someone finds out?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Then we deal with it together," he replied confidently. "But right now, I just want to be with you." His words hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating. I could hardly think, my mind spinning with conflicting thoughts. And then he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine. The kiss was soft at first, a gentle exploration that ignited a fire deep within me. I melted against him, losing myself in the sensation. It was wrong, yet it felt so right. I kissed him back, my hands finding their way to his hair, pulling him closer. When we finally pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed, the reality of what we had done crashed over me like a wave. "I shouldn't have done that," I gasped, my heart racing. "David, forget about him for a moment," Jake urged, his hands gripping my waist. "Just focus on us." The intensity in his eyes made my heart skip a beat. I could feel the pull between us, drawing me in like a moth to a flame. "But what about the consequences?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Let's not think about that right now. Let's just enjoy this. Enjoy us." His words sent shivers down my spine, and I couldn't help but nod, surrendering to the moment. As we stood there, wrapped up in each other, everything else faded away. The classroom, the world outside, even the memory of David waiting for me at home dissolved into nothing. All that mattered was the heat of Jake's body against mine, the way he made me feel alive. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling with uncertainty. "Absolutely," he replied, his eyes locked onto mine. "This is real. Just trust me." And in that moment, I did. I let go of my fears, of the guilt clawing at my insides. I stepped further into the unknown, enveloped in the intoxicating thrill of betrayal. I didn't want to think about what this meant for my life outside these four walls. All I wanted was this moment, with him. The door was closed, the world outside forgotten, and in the silence of that classroom, I felt the undeniable truth. This was where I belonged, at least for now.